Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And I'm Steve.
And today we're going to give our hot take review on the game that we just finished playing, Windward. But before we jump into our review, got a couple quick announcements to talk about and some poll results. So let's jump in here. Number one, first of all, I want to apologize to all of our listeners, anyone who's been listening to the podcast recently. My sound sucks. It's been terrible lately, a lot of echo in here. What's happened is that I moved into a house, and for some reason, the room that I picked for my office, which is also where I'm recording my podcast, is like an echo tunnel. It's like the worst echo. It's like this room was made to echo. And so I've been trying to do all these things to fix it. I put up sound tiles on the room and everything, so we've had a lot of problems. I eventually moved to recording the podcast into my laundry room, which was working great, but now we've got a foreign exchange student living in our house who took over my wife's office, so she moved her office into the laundry room. So I have to find another place to record. So I moved back to my office the last couple of weeks, and the echo's been terrible. So today I literally set up a tent in my office, and I'm recording the podcast in a tent right now. So hopefully this is better. If it's not, I apologize. But just wanted to let you guys know that we are aware that I'm dealing with some sound issues. We're going to try to get this fixed. If the tent doesn't do it, I don't know. I'm gonna go hide in the pantry or something and record next week.
I'm only sad that they can't see what we're seeing, which is Tim sitting in a tent made of his daughter's toys and a blanket, a woolly blanket.
Only the finest acoustical paneling at the Tim Studios.
She has one of those tent building kits where you put like little poles into balls and you can make it in different shapes. So I made her build a tent thing over my podcast table today, and I've wrapped blankets around it. So it's really hot in here, guys.
It's looking good.
I hope so. I hope it fixed it. The sacrifices I make for you guys. The other announcement I've got is that if you haven't seen on social media, I did get invited to guest on another board game podcast, the Organized Fun podcast. So if you haven't already, go check it out. These guys are great. Phil and Mark are two guys that live in Wales, and they do a podcast kind of like ours. They play a game and they talk about it after they play. But one of the things I really like about their format that's really fun is that they also record while we're playing. And so they kind of edit in some of the actual gameplay conversation and the trash talking and stuff like that into the conversation about recording afterwards. I really love that format. I think it works really well. So go check them out. The episode I was on is the Forbidden Island episode. If you want to get to know me a little bit more and hear some of the stuff I've been doing, go check out the Organized Fun podcast. Really great guys and a podcast worth following. All right. So, hey, before we jump into Windward, I have some poll results for you. So I asked which premium components get you most excited in a board game, because I love upgrading board games. I love premium components. I love buying games that have really nice components or replacing them if I need to. I said I think a well-made dual layer board is probably the most likely to draw me in, but I also hate cardboard coins and replace them whenever I can. The four options I gave in this poll was number 1, miniatures, number 2, metal coins, number 3, dual layer boards, and number 4, screen printed wooden bits. So before I read the poll results here, oh, by the way, also we have 4 people recording with us tonight. I think this is a first for one of our game review episodes. So we have all 4 of us tonight. So all 4 of you, if there was an upgraded component in a game, what would be the thing that would draw you into a game the most? Adam, what about you?
I said dual layer boards, and that's recently inspired by my purchase of Smartphone Inc. and our play last week. But this board has me captivated. The pieces all slot in there. It's so functional. It keeps everything organized. It just feels good on my brain to have a little spot for every little piece and every component. And it's just nice. It's so tactile. Fantastic. So the dual player boards wasn't even close for me on this one. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, before Chris jumps in, that was the game that actually inspired the poll, because I was thinking about that after we played last week. And that's the first game I've ever played where it wasn't just even your own player board, but the actual like full game board that's dual layered. It's so much fun. It's awesome.
It's nice. I think Polis is another game that has a board like that.
I've never seen one like that at all.
But it seems pretty rare for that board, the actual board, to have dual layers.
So for me, I think my answer was screen printed wooden tokens, and the game that immediately came to mind was Wingspan, which has great screen printed wooden tokens, which replace little circular cardboard chits, which I hate more than pretty much anything. But the truth is that all of them make a huge amount of difference, and it really depends on the game. There are some games, Terraforming Mars, for example, that really needs a two-layer player board. And that's just an absolute necessity. So it really depends on the game, but all of them add so much. I think that all of them are great answers. So that's when I'm going to be wishy-washy, but I think that it's difficult to say.
Chris, for Wingspan, the screen printed minis, that's like an aftermarket one, right? Is that Meeple Source? Did you get yours from Meeple Source?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, those are great. I got those as well for my Wingspan. I think those are great upgraded components for that.
Yeah, and that was actually a tough choice too, because I mean, there's about 20 different places you can get different upgraded resource tokens for Wingspan. It's a very popular game, and a lot of people are doing that. And the Meeple Source ones are great, but honestly, many of them would have been terrific.
Makes what is typically just like a piece of wood, colored wood, and it gives it some texture. And for most games, I really like it. I think it makes a big difference, so I like that. Steve, any upgraded components that stand out to you that tend to draw you into a game when you see it?
Like Chris said, it's situational, but I do love metal coins.
Nice.
They're just so nice to handle. I'd almost give up a 2-layer board, even just to have the metal coins.
Yeah. I love metal coins too. And most times, if you've got coin, like I can deal with cardboard shits in a lot of cases, but for some reason, coins just don't feel right to be cardboard. It feels like they need to be heavier. So I will usually replace cardboard coins if I can with metal. All right, so here's the poll results. And we had 79 responders on this one. 19% said miniatures, 16% said metal coins, 57% said dual layer boards. So they're on board with me here, and Adam as well. And then only 8% said screen printed wooden bits. I was actually a little surprised by this. I didn't realize that dual layer boards were as important to other people as they are to me. But to me, it just like really improves the gameplay experience regardless of what you're looking at and how you're picking stuff up. It makes things just work better. The game it flows better with it. So that was cool. I had a few comments here. There's a whole bunch of comments, so I'm not going to read all of them today. Mark, the thoughtful gamer, said dual layer boards actually help you play the game. The others are gravy or sometimes negatively affect the experience. So I would agree that typically they're the most functional benefit to the game. I don't know that other upgraded components negatively impact the experience. Maybe some large, huge minis might get in the way or something like that, but I don't know. They help me as well. Crotalus Game said, I can't speak for the rest of our team, but I love games with minis, and talked about painting games. Adam, you said you painted some minis before, right? I think we talked about this in another episode.
So yeah, as far as I got was doing just the some primer on it, and then I didn't even do you can do another layer from the top with a lighter paint that gives it a nice contrast, a base contrast, and then you go over, and so all I did after that was I dry brushed some pieces. So I gave a basic primer level, and then this usually a metallic dry brush on top of that, just to make some of the highlights and lowlights pop. So instead of all this gray plastic out there on the board, it's so much more vibrant to have even just a touch of color I put on there with that little dry brush. The details are there, the factions are much easier to distinguish. So not only is it prettier, but it can also be slightly functional too, being able to quickly scan the board and see whose pieces belong to who and where they're all situated. So that was my reason for wanting to paint them. I'm a horrible artist, so I've been watching some videos and thinking about delving into it more, but that's about as far as I've gotten for now.
Yeah, I'd like to give it a shot sometime. One of these days, I'll pick up some paints and at least take a stab at some simpler minis and give it a shot. There's a Twitter account called Sentient Board Game Souls, and they always just have like board game components with googly eyes pasted on them. And they often talk in the first person as if they're actually like board game components. They always crack me up when I see this. But they responded and said, we do like custom chunky or large dice. Yeah, I love custom dice, things that have unique printing on it. I said my favorite is Euphoria. If you've ever seen Euphoria, it's a 6-sided die, just has 1 through 6 on them, but they put little gears on each side, and the number of gears is equal to the number of pips. So it's really, and they're cool colors and stuff like that. So that's fun. Our friend, the Sentient Board Game Souls, is going to come back here in just a second because I'm going to read my favorite comment, and this is from our friend Jeff Milton. Jeff says, a dual-layered board is like a small friend who helps make sure things go where they belong and makes every board game that needs them more enjoyable. Because you're going to hit the board once a game, but don't worry, your dual-layered friend has your back. And I love that comment.
Nicely said, Jeff. Nicely said.
And then, of course, the Sentient Board Game Soul says, definitely, all board games are your friends. We just want folks to have fun. So there they are talking about being a board game component again. So excellent. Everyone on our group really enjoys and appreciates nice components, upgraded components. So this was a fun, poll to kind of hear the results on. So why don't we jump into the rules of Windward?
All right, Windward. In Windward, you play the captain of a sailing ship, sailing the skies of the wind-blasted planet Celis. But you're not the only ones out there. During your travels, you'll encounter competing vessels and giant kaiju-like creatures known as cresters, which are the source of Windward's primary currency, which is gas. The goal is to hunt the cresters, harvest the gas they contain, and bring it back to the central trading outpost for riches and notoriety. During a turn, players take one or more of several actions, including moving their ships or its small longboats, spending gas to improve their ship and its munitions, hiring crew, or attaining notoriety. Crew members in particular will be important, as they provide new abilities and help build the productivity of your engine. Players can purchase one-time use supplies such as coffee that allows the players to take an extra turn, or bait that helps draw cresters. And finally, players may also use their supplies, pick up items found on Celis, and collect rewards they may have earned. Much of the activity is accomplished through a worker placement mechanism called giving orders, and all these actions will be critical in the dangerous hunt for cresters. Now, the cresters aren't hard to find, but getting to them isn't always an easy task, because of Celis' intense winds, which change frequently and can dramatically affect where the ships can fly. For example, ships may take unlimited moves in the direction of the wind, but they're completely unable to move directly into the wind. Then again, sometimes the cresters find you too, and when that happens, whether you're the predator or the prey, the hunt is on. Cresters come in various sizes and strengths, and when an encounter occurs, players will battle a crester until one of the two wins. This can result in victory in a hold full of slain crester and valuable gas, or a demoralized crew and potentially a destroyed ship. Even if the player is victorious, their precious cargo now makes them a prime target for other players who may seek to attack the laden ship and pirate its stores. The captain, wily and daring enough to make it back to the central outpost with a crester, will be rewarded with riches and notoriety, and when one player reaches 15 points on the notoriety track, the game ends with one final round, and the player with the most notoriety is the winner. Windward was designed by Hayden Lepiska, Daniel Aronson, and Nick Tompkins, with art by Justin Spice, and it's published by Playmonster and Eldorado Games. And I gotta say, I'm dying to hear the conversation around this one because, as Tim mentioned, we have an unusual situation in that we have 4 podcasters tonight. And I think that Steve joined us primarily because he wanted to debate with me on what he thinks I'm going to say about this game. So I'm dying to hear what he thinks I'm going to say and what he has to say about it as well.
So first, Chris, let me ask you a question before we jump into the gameplay and mechanisms here. When you told us about this game that you wanted to play a couple days ago, I'd never heard about it before. And that's unusual. I try to keep up with a lot of new games, and this game just got I think it was on Kickstarter in 2019. It's just been distributed, and I looked it up today, and there was like 4,300 backers. So within the last couple of weeks, about 4,300 people got their copy of this game. What kind of motivated you to want to play it? You ran across it in a store and saw it, and it kind of drew you in. So, what got you excited about this game?
Yeah, it was actually a completely random story, but my in-laws were in town this week, and we went down to Cannon Beach, which is on the Oregon coast, and my son wanted to go into a toy shop. So I wandered in there with him, and it just happened that they had a few hobby games, and one of them was Windward. And I saw the picture on the front of the box, and it looked really cool. There's like kind of a kaiju coming up through a cloud and a sailing ship kind of going toward it, and it's really dramatic looking and really interesting. So I picked up the box, and I looked at it, and I made a mental note to myself, look up this game because it looks kind of interesting. It has interesting minis. It's a cool looking setup. I went home, looked it up. I read the instruction book and watched the how to play video, and I was absolutely hooked. I was just dying to play this game, and so I proposed it since tonight was my night to pick a game. Proposed it, and the rest is history.
Let's get into the gameplay and mechanisms. I will start with Adam here. Adam, any mechanisms or gameplay that stood out to you here? Anything you want to talk about to start with?
Yeah, first impression, this game, I thought there was some resource management. All right, there might be a little bit of trading this for that and there is a little bit of that. But the main thing that stands out to me is this game is one of the most combative games that we have ever played. I feel like it's right up there for me, right up there with like Kemet. It's right up there with Innis. It's just more so than Innis, I would say. It's just a slugfest, back and forth and back and forth. And you really do, Chris read the description, you really do feel like a wily captain of a ship trying to get back to port. And if you feel like if you can pull that off, it's pretty awesome because it's no easy feat. So the combat here is one of the mechanisms that really stood out to me.
I want to talk about a situation that happened here. So at the start of the game, I took my first turn. I was the first player, took my turn. I ran out and I killed one of these red...
Cresters.
The cresters. I killed one of the big red cresters, which was not easy to do, but I built my engine up really quickly, went out there, took my shot, and I won. I killed this red crester. Chris was next. He comes out, he knocks me out. He takes out my ship and steals the red crester from me. For the next several turns, Chris is trying to get back, and then Adam comes after Chris had already converted the crester into a tooth. Adam comes and takes the tooth from Chris. I don't think the tooth finally made it back to port at the end of the game. The turn when Chris ended the game was when that tooth from the very first turn finally made it back, because it was just constant, like, he's about to get closer. I'm going to go and take that tooth from him. I'm going to go and beat him up and try to steal it from him. So it went back and forth a few times. It got dropped. It was out there, just sitting out there ready to be picked up again. And finally, Chris managed to make it back with another gray tooth, basically got the points to end the game. So just to add on to what Adam was saying about it being combative, that's how the game goes. The thing that I tried to do in my first turn didn't get accomplished until by somebody else at the end of the game. So yeah, I would agree with you. Steve, anything that stands out to you from a mechanism perspective?
One of the most unique things I thought about the game was the two-dimensional aspect of the playing area.
Well, three-dimensional.
Yes, it is three-dimensional. Yes. The individual components cannot go up or down within the third dimension, though, so kind of on separate levels. So the red cresters and the wind ships operate at the higher elevation, and they can only interact with each other and the opponent's wind ships. And then the longboats and the gray questers are on the lower elevation, and they can only interact with each other. It's not that unusual to have certain components that can only interact with each other, but what made it unique was the physical depiction of the elevation. The red cresters and the wind ships are on higher platforms, and so it's really easy to see visually which components can interact with each other. And I thought that was unique.
So it was unique. Did you find it fun?
There's not enough space for all these large platforms in the actual play areas. The minis are cool, but they're too big for the board, especially with the bases that are necessary for the high elevation tokens. There's just not enough space. So you have to kind of just jam a bunch of stuff next to the active hex and hope you remember where everything was by the end of the combat.
I think the idea is interesting of these multiple levels of moving around, but the execution was a little rough in this game.
At least in the mod.
Yeah. I'm looking at a real picture, though, and it looks nearly identical. The platform base for a red crester takes up 80% of the active square.
I think you're totally right. Like, it's going to be crowded in there with the way the game is designed and the size of the hexes and everything. So again, the idea is cool, but then the execution here in this kind of platform doesn't quite make it happen.
But even without the physical limitation, did you guys find the mechanism of having to basically take actions?
How did you find it, Tim? I feel like you did not find it.
Well,
you sound like a man who has something to say.
Well, no, to be honest, I never dropped the dropship in this whole game. And mainly because it didn't seem like, maybe I didn't get the opportunity. I mean, the game kind of restricts what you can do a lot. It didn't seem like, to me, even if I had been close enough to where I'd kind of pursued it, like the activity of having to go out, use actions to drop a dropship, go out, pick one of the gray whales up. The combat with the gray whales was almost nothing happened. They were so easy to defeat that, yes, you could get an unlucky roll, but they were pretty easy to mitigate with a lot of things. And so you were just basically taking a lot of actions and a lot of time on your turn to get to this next level, use the extra components to activate that mechanism. So I didn't think it was worth all of the rules overhead and all of that stuff that went into it. That's why I'm curious if you guys did, if you've actually found it enjoyable to play with that second level.
Part of the reason that particular game played out that way was because both of our achievements were ship movement based achievements. The achievements are random, and they could have easily been Crester or Gray Crester related. And so when you're on the ship, the only actions you can basically take are to move your ship or do something with your longboats. And since we were trying to move the whole time, I think it just wasn't worth the action to drop the longboat, give it movement space. But Yeah. I thought the concept was interesting, but also I did not drop a longboat the entire game, so it's hard to tell.
I want to jump on something that Steve said here, and I just appreciate the fact that he used the term longboat, because all of these things come back to why I wanted to play this game in the first place. And you have to put yourself in the thematics of this game and appreciate what they were doing here. And I think there's a lot of things that are actually brilliantly executed. And I think the 2-layer or 2 elevation play field is actually a really good example of that. You have your ship, which is essentially a sort of space version of your, a sailing ship back in the day. And then you have your longboats, which are these smaller ships that drop down out of the main ship. And they're the ones who hunt the smaller cresters, or the equivalent of whales. And longboats and all that. I grew up in coastal New England where whaling was kind of a thing. So this all kind of hit a nerve for me. And I think the thematics of it were actually quite brilliant, because I can picture this in my mind. I can picture, the big sailing ship, and then, the little longboat drops out of it, and, the rowers, row you over to the smaller whale, and they go after the whale, tow the whale back to the main ship, and it gets loaded onto the ship where it gets processed. And the larger ship goes after the larger of the cresters, which are much more dangerous and difficult to deal with. But, one thing that feeds into that as well, that I think was, to me, the most dynamic part of the game, and the thing that most affected the gameplay to me, was the wind, which was thematically brilliant, but it was also the thing that I think I had the hardest time with in the game. And just to explain, there's every round, every time that you go through the full number of players, you re-roll the wind, and then the wind moves in a certain direction. And you can move unlimited spaces in the direction of the wind, and you can't move any spaces directly into the wind. And that was such a huge part of the game that it can't be overstated. I mean, I think it was kind of the controlling dynamic of the game. And of course, again, thematically brilliant. It fits in perfectly with the theme. I mean, a ship can't go against the wind, a sailing ship. But at the same time, and I'll get into this a little bit later, it also created a lot of challenges in actually making this a playable game in some ways. Drop the mic.
Tim, you have a response to that, or just a big sigh? Is that all you're?
Bam.
I do have a response to that. I have a question for Chris about that. So when you read the rules about this, that probably sounded like the most interesting thing, about it. Did you have some turns here where that mechanism made the game not fun for you?
I did, and I mean, I'm trying to really separate out the sour grapes, because I couldn't do what I wanted to do, from I think this is a problematic mechanism. And I think that I need to play this game again before I really make a judgment call on this one. But I felt like there were times when you may have had a brilliant plan, and then the wind rolls in the wrong direction, and your plan is dead. And it can happen, there's so much random stuff happening in here, with other players moving in and doing a certain thing, attacking you or attacking another crester, or, the wind changes and now you can't move in that direction, where there were some real problems with that. But again, I'm not sure it was necessarily a negative, but I did feel at some points when we were playing, it felt like a negative to me. Now, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that, because I definitely had some strong reactions to it.
So I feel like this has the potential to be one of the coolest mechanisms I've ever seen in a board game. If on subsequent plays, I want to see if there is that skill ceiling there where you can totally mitigate what's going to happen with the wind on your next turn. So that's something you need to look. You got to be a wily captain. You have to be smart and savvy and anticipate that, okay, the wind's going to change. Do I have the cards in my hand to mitigate what's going to happen with that wind? And how am I going to use that to my advantage next turn? If it doesn't work the way I want, what's my backup plan going to be? So maybe I can pick up some gas along the way, or go over to this guy, and be able to look at the little terrain and stuff that's out there on the map, and really put yourself in a position where you're not going to hose yourself on the next round, no matter what. I hope that potential is there. I'm not sure if it is, but I feel like a lot of those elements are going to be there the more you play this game, and that's kind of really exciting to me.
I'm going to talk about a couple mechanisms in response to that. And one of them has to do with the fact that each player's turn, essentially, you have 4 action movements to do and 2 workers you can place. And so your turn consists of everything you can do in a round. So sometimes each player's turn took anywhere between about 5 and maybe 15 minutes to take, I would say, on average. Sometimes they were pretty long while you're waiting. Some of those turns, you waited for 30 to 40 minutes to get back around to you. And because of the wind mechanism, you literally couldn't do anything. Like I had one turn where I could have either moved like 4 spaces to get towards my goal and do absolutely nothing else. Or in my case, I just used a bunch of movement to get one of the achievements on the game. But that wasn't a fun turn, even though I did get some points for it. It wasn't a fun thing to do when I was waiting all that time for it. And maybe Steve didn't run into this, but I think the rest of us all did at least run into one situation where we waited all that time for our turn to come back around, and then we basically couldn't do anything, we couldn't accomplish anything valuable or useful. And then that leads into the worker placement mechanism. It's not traditional worker placement where you're blocking other spaces that people can use. You're basically taking one of 6 action spaces that are on your own player board, depending on whether you're out in the elements or whether you're at base. When you're out in the elements, there was several turns where, especially if I couldn't get close to the whales or whatever they're called, or couldn't use my drop ships, basically there was only one action that would do anything for me. That was one more movement. And if the wind was preventing you from getting anywhere, then basically you didn't really do anything with those actions. So all you were doing was moving, maybe futilely, nowhere at all. So to me, that was extremely frustrating. And when I read the rulebook, it seemed interesting. But when I found out that you could never move against the wind at all, it became almost impassable sometimes. Maybe you're right, Adam. Maybe you could set yourself up for not, just say, I'm not going to get to the edge of the board. Or if I do, I'm going to make sure I stop close to a thing that will let me get to the other side of the board. Maybe that was just us messing up. But, that was pretty rough that it led to many rounds where people just didn't have anything fun to do on a turn. So that was my feeling about it. I think it was a poorly developed use of what could have been an interesting mechanism.
One more comment about the wind, and it kind of ties back into our discussion about the longboats, which a lot of people didn't use. And that probably is a combination of our failing and maybe a problem with game balance in the point structure. But what we probably should have been doing in those situations where either the wind was problematic or we thought it might be problematic was we should have had those longboats deployed, because they are not affected by the wind. And on those turns where you can't move your ship, you could have been moving the longboats, taking a gray quester, which is worth almost as much points and potentially as much gas as a red quester. That's a different type of action than what we were doing, which is mostly racing around the board to either complete the speed achievements or trying to kill the red questers.
Yeah, I got a second what Steve just said. I mean, that we really didn't take advantage of the longboats and the gray cresters. They're easy to kill. They're worth almost as many points, like Steve said, as a red crester. And yet we seem to focus so much on those red cresters for that one extra notoriety point. And in retrospect, that was probably a really bad choice. And one of the things that can kind of tip you off to that fact is that there is a limited number for a 4-player game. There are 3 gray cresters. They're kind of the low-hanging fruit. They're kind of the easy target that can get you a lot of points. And we just really didn't take advantage of that. So I wonder if that's one of the problems that we had.
Well, maybe, Chris, but I was, the turn I was talking about where I couldn't do anything but just kind of move around the outside of the board. Like, the 3 gray crystals were on the other side of the board. So I could have deployed my dropship, but it would have taken like 3 more rounds before it actually got over to a gray crester. So sure, maybe that would have been a smart thing to do anyway, just get it out there and have it moving around. But I don't see how it would have had that much of an impact, personally.
Part of the problem, I think, was just the momentum of the game, right? Unless I counted wrong, we only played 5 rounds. The whole game, 5 rounds, which doesn't give you very much time to deploy longboats, use actions to give them movement speed, actually send them somewhere, pick them back up. Like, there just wasn't a lot of time to do that. So difficult to use those.
So you're talking about the length of turns, Tim, and I think the box here says the whole game takes
Yeah.
Did it say 30 to 90 minutes?
Yeah, that's a little unrealistic, but yeah, that is what it is.
But I don't know. It's the way, the way we played it. The rules are tough to grasp, I would say, but they're really quite simple when you put it thematically, like you were explaining it, Chris. It's exactly like you said. You're a ship and you have a dinghy. You send the dinghy out to do some stuff if you want to, and with your big ship, you're going to go. So once you put it in those terms, everything just falls into place, and it's really, by the end of the game, everything just made total sense to me. And I feel like subsequent plays, this game is speeding up rapidly.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. What do you think about the fact that you're doing all these actions, but you're just doing them on your turn, and then the next person goes and they take a whole bunch of actions? Like, a lot of modern game designs now, they kind of do the alternating actions. I take one action and get the benefit, then you take an action. It's kind of a more, like minuscule shift, like worker placement. I place one worker and get that benefit, then the next person places. Versus in this case, you do all your move, you place all your workers, you spend your cards, you do your combats, and then the next person goes. Do you guys think that worked here? Or do you think that it would have benefited from separating out the pacing so at least people weren't sitting around waiting for so long in between turns?
I will say, I think that is one of the shortcomings of this game. And I mean, there were times when, I went, and then Adam went after me, and I go run down the hall, go to the bathroom, get a drink, and I come back and it'd still be Adam's turn. And there's so much stuff that you can do, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, there's not a sequence of things you have to do. You have a whole sort of palette of things, and then you can do them in any order that you want, which in a way is actually quite interesting because it makes it so you can really sort of tailor your move to the circumstances. But at the same time, you end up sitting there for a long time waiting for people to take their moves. And especially when you factor in the wind, I mean, the amount of time that we spent just sitting there while someone figured out, can I move where I want to move because of the wind situation? I mean, I'm sure you guys must have sat there for a half hour over the course of the night tonight watching me go through that exercise. And I'm
a lot more than I have.
And then
sorry,
and then
but I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one.
And then you went to take your move, and you're like, "Oh crap! I calculated this 10 times. How could it not be right?"
Yeah, but I mean, definitely that. I think that is a shortcoming, Tim. I agree with you on that.
I can see the frustrations. I don't know. It was just so unique to me and so different to me that I really, maybe it's just novelty. But I don't know. I think there's something to it, and it's just kind of a fascinating, different mechanism for me. So I enjoyed it from that aspect, and maybe it's just something about the way my brain likes to do that kind of puzzle. So that was just kind of a neat aspect to me. I wish my internet wasn't cutting out so much so I could have countered along with you guys and been like, oh, you could go here, look at this, you could do this too. I wanted to point everything out like the freaking nerd annoying guy. But it was just a fun movement puzzle for me.
Okay, now I do have one mechanism I really, not to say there isn't more, but there's one thing I want to call out that you guys haven't talked about already. There's a little bit of an engine building thing here. When you're back in port, that's where the more interesting actions were. It didn't get you anywhere in the game, but it at least felt like you had more variety you could do. So there are a few things you could do. You could add a crew member. And so there were 3 different double-sided crew members that each side had a different thing that could go on. So the max you could get was 3 crew members, but you were picking from 6 different crew members. And they all gave you a little bit of a benefit. That was pretty fun, I thought. And then the thing I actually really liked was there are these cards you can get. What are they called?
Supply cards?
Supplies, yeah, the supplies you can get. And the supply cards I really liked because there was a huge variety in them. And so when you picked up supply cards, you would pick up 3 if you did one action, or you could pick up 3, I think, if you spent a gas. But you would pick up 3 off these 3 different piles that were face up. So you got a variety to choose from. When you picked one up, you could pick up more. And there was like 7 or 8 different cards in there, and they all had fairly strong effects. So having a handful of those cards when you went back out to sea, it felt like you could accomplish anything. And that was really fun to me, that you could go back to port, add up your supplies, get some cannons if you needed to, get some people, and kind of build up ready for this big adventure. If only the adventure didn't get you stuck out there for 4 rounds because the wind was going the wrong direction, they would have been even more fun. But I enjoyed that. For some reason, the cards, although they're fairly simple.
Was that the fault of the game or the fault of the captain of the ship? Who knows? Who knows?
The captain that won the game? Do you think it was that? Maybe you're right. but I did like that. I like the going back and the concept of supplying up and building up and getting ready to go back out for these big adventures was fun to me.
I don't know. There's talk about your crew doesn't have too much faith in their captain despite coming away with a victory.
Ouch.
That's what I'm hearing at the port.
Hey, here's one I'm interested to hear Steve's perspective on, because, I mean, there were a number of times that you went into battle, Steve, and you probably should have won, and you didn't because you had some bad rolls. And, I mean, and they were pretty abysmal. I mean, I usually roll pretty bad. You rolled really bad, and it felt unfair almost to me, because it felt like there were situations where you had set yourself up better than the dice represented, and you ended up, having some failures in there. I'm curious to hear how you felt about that dynamic of the game.
Well, basically what happened was I made some mistakes in combat early in the game. One of the things that is extremely valuable and part of the thing that keeps your turns productive and moving forward is gas conversion. And if you don't win fights with questers and convert and process them before somebody else takes the quester away from you, you are not going to have that gas. Or if your morale is too low when you do process the quester, you're not going to have enough gas. And that means you're not going to have the extra free actions or abilities that you need to keep winning combats without going back to port every time to pick up more supplies. I undercalculated some of my early game combat. I had looked at the dice already. I knew they were weighted towards the low end. And so I underplanned, and I spent the rest of the game gambling, trying to catch up. And unfortunately, rolled poorly. But I knew it was a gamble when I went into those combats. I would have liked to roll better than just ones all the time, but I knew even with better than ones that some of those combats would have been very close. It was mostly just me gambling heavily, trying to make up for my early losses.
That's quite a mature take on a lot of really bad dice rolling, Steve. I'm proud of you.
And it's worth pointing out that the dice in this one, which are custom dice, which is interesting because, Tim, you had mentioned custom dice early on in the poll results. They are... they're not your standard D6. They have, I think, 2 or 3 ones, a couple of 2s, and then
three
maybe
ones,
a 3
2
on
2s.
each of them. So they're weighted toward the lower end, and in a combat, whoever rolls the highest number wins the combat. It's relatively simple, but it's definitely weighted toward the lower end.
I don't think I had a single combat victory in this. I maybe had a couple ties, but I was right there with your frustration, Steve. So I tried to do... Again, I had a dumb attack early on that I got wasted in. And then, a couple of subsequent where I just rolled ones and maybe 2 here and there and had nothing to mitigate. So I just was trying to take some targets of opportunity when I had the chance. Again, I was behind, kind of a nothing to lose except the game situation for me. So I tried
Everything
to
to lose.
Yeah, everything to lose. But that was definitely, I don't know, it was frustrating for me, but that just means I can do better next time. I know what to do next time.
Or not, if you roll poorly.
Yeah, I think if you look at the end score rankings, it's pretty much a direct correlation to the number of gas tokens collected by those players.
I think I had 1 gas token the whole game, so that's...
right.
That's,
and you got third.
Oh, I'm going to talk about just one more mechanism, and this is not just this game. It's one of my least favorite mechanisms, and that's where a big part of the game is trying to figure out how to move. Mage Knight is a great example. It's a really interesting, epic game, but most of your turn is just discarding cards to try to move through terrain. Gloomhaven, you have to spend half your action just moving around the board. Descent, you have to spend half your action points moving around the board. That's not fun to me. I think that's, I was trying to figure out why I didn't like Sold Last Days as a Star. And I think that's what it is. It's that most of your turn is just figuring out where to move stuff. And that's never been a fun puzzle to me, is just moving around. And so I just want to be upfront that that's probably going to partly flavor my own experience with this game, is that is mostly what the game was. It was just figuring out where to move on a turn. You got 4 movement actions and you used them the best you could, and then otherwise you had a couple other things you might be able to do. So this game was all about just trying to move around the wind, plan that movement, set yourself up for a future turn, and try to do the movement the best you can. And that's not fun to me. So that's probably going to flavor my experience. I think the wind made it even less fun to me, even though it could have been interesting, but it mostly just got in the way of me just getting to do the things I wanted to do, which was go and kill cresters and go and fight other people and go back to port, like all that stuff. The movement just got in the way of the fun part of it to me. What do you guys think? Any thoughts on that?
I would say that the movement was a frustrating part of the game, but I'd also have to say without the movement aspect of this game, there is no game here, right? Like Dune is a much better, does much better at almost all the mechanics of this game except for the movement aspect. So that's what makes this particular game unique.
Yeah, that's the game, right?
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I mean, I think you really, if to enjoy this game, you really have to give yourself over to the thematics of it, which are, like I said before, are really brilliant. I mean, there's a lot of things in there that feel so consistent with the concept of what you're doing with this game, but that isn't necessarily always fun. It can be really frustrating sometimes.
What do we jump into the production of Windward? This seems like a pretty epic production as far as big minis on stands, lots of plastic. Anything that really stood out to you guys? Steve, why don't you start? Anything on the production that stands out to you?
Well, I'll just reiterate that the minis are really cool. It's pretty easy to tell what all the pieces are and who owns them at a glance because of the form factor and coloration of the minis. So I liked that. One thing I didn't like were the supply cards. And maybe in person it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but I thought the art was pretty boring and the text was very difficult to read. I suppose once you were more familiar with the cards, none of that would matter as much. Oftentimes I thought I had a card that gave me plus dice or plus strength, and instead it was a plus hit. And to really zoom in on the card just to see what it said was annoying when there was no reason for it. Even in the white space on the card, they could have made the font a lot bigger, and those pictures were not particularly helpful anyways.
So not necessarily confusing like, this is confusing, more confusing like, I forgot to wear my bifocals, so...
Yeah, I mean, they're huge cards, and it's got a really small font size in a small white box at the bottom of the card.
That's fair.
Yeah. And the rest of the cards are all monochrome. Like, why? Why do you have huge monochrome stenciled images on these cards that you're supposed to be able to read? I don't know.
Well, let me defend the theme there. I think this is supposed to be kind of a retro futuristic, we're in space, like space whalers. This is on parchment paper, and and obviously I don't know if that works or not. It depends on your perspective, but I think that's what they were going for.
They could have used a different font, and it would have been a lot more readable, regardless of everything else.
Yeah,
I'm just bolding the font even.
Steve doesn't like the font. I'm with you,
Yes.
Chris. I like the thematically. It's like, you're in a desert and you got this ancient parchment that has these little schematics on it. But the font is tiny. I did a couple times too. I needed my bifocals and need to tip them over so I could read what it was saying. Just to reiterate, the ships are cool. The colors are cool. The double layer, the different stand heights, very cool. Some of the art on the map was a little tough for me, like the rocks, the blocked out chunks that you couldn't travel through versus the spawning grounds where the red ones spawn, where the gray ones spawn. The color get a little blendy for me, and then stuff got a little crowded out there. Just the board in general, I wish they made the hex sizes like twice as big. So maybe, I don't know, like 2 pieces could fit in 1 hex, and then that would avoid a lot of confusion. I think that's all that's ever going to be in 1 hex is 2 pieces anyway. So just some touches like that for me. Otherwise, no issues with the production here. What about you, Tim?
I had one thing that I thought was really nice about this is that they could have just put a single map out, but they made it into 6 modular pieces. And so every time you set up the board, you set them up in a random order. And so the map's always going to be laid out a little bit different. And that was a nice touch for what otherwise could have just been a flat map. And it gives you some variability, which is nice because there's not too much other variability in this game. Talking to the graphic design, I agree. They were going for style for sure. And that's what they tried to get. But whoever is their graphic designer doesn't know how to use font weight or size or style in a useful way at all. But otherwise, the user experience was pretty nice. The player boards were well laid out and easy to read and understand what you could do with them. So I like that. I didn't like the look of the player boards, but I like the usability of the player boards. That's my main thought about the production here. It looks like, from my perspective, a Kickstarter was put out. They invested a lot of money into making miniatures, which would sell Kickstarters, which it clearly did. But they could have put more into the art and the graphic design to make it a little bit better experience. So I agree with Steve on that.
Isn't it funny how something like font, normally you don't notice until you do notice because it's horrible.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, as the only person here who actually does wear bifocals, let me just say that I didn't have a huge problem with that. If anything, there was a confusion between ships and boats. That was one thing. There was ships, which is your large ship, and there's the boats, those are your long boats, and there's a big difference there. And there's the difference between hits and the difference between strength, because strength is the number of dice you roll, and the hits are the number of pips that you get on a particular die. So, I mean, I personally did not find that terribly problematic, but I can understand that perspective. But I thought overall this game it's a beautiful game. I like the map. I like the thematics of the cards. There's this kind of almost steampunk kind of retro futuristic, we're whalers, but we're in space on another planet and, in flying ships rather than sailboats, or at least ocean-going sailboats. And I think overall, the effect here is quite wonderful. So I don't have a lot of complaints. If anything, after this play, I'm still considering whether or not I want to buy this game. I'm not 100% sold on the gameplay mechanics, but I am 100% sold on the production of it and how beautiful it was. And I don't think it was in frivolous ways. I think they actually did use a lot of that to maintain that level of thematic consistency, which I think adds a lot to the game. And you're either going to be into the theme and you're really going to like it, or you're going to be not into the theme and you're going to find those flaws where you say, well, it just didn't work for me. And I think that can be the difference between whether you love or hate this game.
Well, okay, I want to just push back on that a little bit, and I think it's a very cool theme. I think that somebody took a whaling theme. I bet that whoever designed this game probably designed it as a whaling game, and either changed direction, or at least were inspired by whaling, and they made a sci-fi theme, and it's a pretty neat theme, and I like the concept of. I was excited coming into it about what that is, but that doesn't mean that the theme overrides when there's problematic mechanisms or problems with actually having fun in the game. So I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say that liking the theme or not is going to dictate whether you like this game or not.
Oh, no. I didn't mean it that way. I meant that if you have the production issues, like the production, like the graphics, the art, that, certainly gameplay mechanics are number one. If you have a game that has poor gameplay mechanics, nobody's going to enjoy playing it. But you can have a game that has decent gameplay mechanics that you can either like or dislike the art in relation to the theme, and I think that makes a difference there. That's more what I was talking about.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, let's talk about moments in play today, and we've already touched on a few of them that came up as we were talking about mechanisms, but let's see if we got anything that's worth bringing back around here. So, Chris, why don't you start? Any moments of gameplay that stood out to you tonight?
Oh, yeah, I got a few moments. And so, first of all, I appreciate that you brought out that point early on about how that tooth, that the red crester tooth that I pirated away from you at the beginning of the game, didn't actually make it back to the outpost until the very end of the game. And I think that's actually kind of telling about this game. But really, what my mind comes to is the end of this. I mean, it was an epic ending. The ending was absolutely epic. There was a lot of stuff going on. And you and I were kind of neck and neck at the very end of the game. And it turned out that, Adam kind of went for it, and he was doing some bold moves and ended up dying. And as a result of that, he left a crester tooth, a red crester tooth, which is the higher point scoring tooth, right next to me. I was able to grab it up. I was able to bring it back to the port. And all of a sudden, I'm in the lead of this game. And then right after that, Steve goes out and does this big campaign to try to take out Tim. I'm not sure exactly why, but it certainly, I appreciated it. And he rolled badly and ended up losing that fight. And then Tim brought the tooth into, well, that tooth and I think another one into port and got the points for it. And it was just this huge back and forth where there was these in the last few minutes of the game. We were completely changing who was in the lead, I think, at least 2 times. I thought I had it locked up, and in the end, I didn't have it locked up, and that was kind of exciting. It was a bummer in the end, but it was kind of exciting getting to that point. So I thought there was a lot of cool stuff there that, happened at the very end in a very short amount of time, pulling together a lot of points, which on the one hand, sort of going back to mechanics, is really exciting, but at the same time, it almost felt at the end like there was enough random stuff happening that it was almost a roll of the dice as to whether or not you won the game.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the Red Tooth saga here. So at one point, I was gonna steal his Gray Tooth. So boom, I go in there, I roll the dice, I actually get a decent roll. Chris is one above me, but I have a +2. Boom, I got this in the bag. Nope, Chris busts out his swivel gun from his hand of cards. I don't know, +2 more, back in my face. So that little moment right there, just a big old swing. And Chris took me down, right? He slapped me right in the face with that one. And I don't know if I had anything in my cargo at that time, but it was, I think, swooped up promptly by somebody else and then sent back into the story of the Red Tooth saga. So that was a fun moment for me.
What about you, Steve?
Well, telling moments of the game. Honestly, I did not have a lot of fun moments in this game, but I did have some distinct moments in the game, and one of them was... They were all basically me watching my ability to win the game get further and further away from me as the game progressed. And it was only 5 rounds. So basically I got to take 5 turns in 3 hours, and they were all just me calculating how many more points I was falling behind each turn. So out of the 5 rounds, by the beginning of the 4th round, every attack would have had to go my way for me to have a chance at the first place shot. And in response to Chris's comment about why I would have attacked Tim on my last round when I knew I couldn't win, it's because we do league scoring. It would have given me a 2nd place win, which is a lot more points than a last place loss.
Yeah, I want to call out, though, that did not change the win at all, because I didn't get anything from Steve there, Chris. So even though he came and attacked me, it didn't impact my ability to win at all. I just had to go back to port with my tooth. I had 6 gas tokens, which I was able to trade in for another 3 points. So I ended up walking away with 7 extra points at the end there. So it didn't have anything to do with Steve attacking me, but that's a good. I didn't even think about that, Steve, that you were going in for the league points there.
I didn't realize you were doing that anymore. I thought we'd kind of stopped.
Well, not if you're not tracking it.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is true.
We're always playing for 2nd place, no matter what, right? You always got to play for the points. Yeah, all right. So, I'm going to tell you about my first round of this game, and this is going to tell you what kind of set the stage for the whole game for me. As they mentioned, it was about 5 rounds, a lot of downtime in between turns. So I was the first player. I took my first round. I planned it out. I built up an engine. I bought the crew member that would let me get +2 against red cresters. And so then I went out and immediately went to fight a red crester. I had 2 +2 cards in my hand. So I knew I had some combat power. I was like, I'm going to go out there, beat this red crester on my first turn, something nobody else can do. I went out. I won it. I won the combat. And then I hid behind what I thought was a rock. It wasn't a rock. It was something that anyone could get to with almost no actions. So after I did all that, got exactly what I needed to do, kind of planned for how I might get back to base depending on where wind was going. I spent that whole first round doing that. Chris takes his round. He takes a free movement because the winds go in that direction, comes out, does a combat with me, gets the right dice roll. My entire first round was negated. I was destroyed. I was sent back to the main base. Chris took my red tooth. And I basically had to start the game over again at that point after about 35 to 45 minutes waiting for it to come back around to my turn. That is not a fun gameplay experience to me. That's what I remembered the most. That was so frustrating to me. Did I do some things wrong there? Absolutely. I didn't read the iconography on the board right. Although if somebody had the right card in their hand, they could have just gotten through the rocks I thought I was hiding behind anyway. So there's really no guaranteed safe place in this game. So you set yourself up, you mitigate the risk that you can, and you go out and do what you can and try to get back safely. It's risky. You're going to get combat. It's like a lot of area control games. It was moments like that, and there were several of them that were just extremely frustrating, that it just felt like I did something, I spent all this time building up to it, and then it was just all taken away. That's the moment that stands out the most to me. So let's get into our final thoughts and talk about whether you would request to play this again. Adam, why don't we start with you? Out of the 4 of us, I think you're the one that I'm the most unsure about where you're going to land here.
I would absolutely request to play this game again. I think there's enough there, enough I want to explore that, I don't know, it has me intrigued to play it again. Tim, there's definitely some very rough edges to this game. I think I finished last. I got my butt kicked all over the place. Steve and I were fighting it out by like 1 point last. I don't mind a game with low lows because in this game too, there's some high highs. Like, you know, you grab that tooth at the end, you went in, you got like an 8-point swing and you took the victory. I thought that was pretty freaking sweet after all that work. So yeah, I don't mind a game with a little edges and getting beat up a little bit as long as there's an opportunity for some high highs at the other end. After a few plays, I want to see how it feels. Are there ways to mitigate? Are there ways to use that movement to your advantage? What can be done on a turn to kind of work your way back to base? Or is it always going to feel kind of like a desperate, I can't get back situation? So those are the kind of questions I want to get answered on the next play or 2 or 3.
All right. How about you, Steve?
No.
Saw that coming.
I would have liked to have played it back to back because clearly the first game was a learning game for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
The rule book, especially in PDF format, is really hard to navigate, and so it takes a long time to look up even a single definition. We would have been able to play it faster in a second game for sure. How much faster? I don't know. Probably shave an hour off at least, which would have been nice. If I'm going to play an area control space game with random dice combat,
Eclipse.
I'm going to pick Eclipse every single time. Like 10 out of 10 times I'm going to pick Eclipse.
Very good point.
I enjoyed playing a game with some unique mechanics, and the minis were cool, but no, I would not choose to play this game again.
Okay, let me jump in. So I'll let Chris end maybe on a high note if that's where he's feeling. I think he is, but it's pretty clear that I didn't have a fun time playing this game from what I had to say about this. And I think it kind of leads to, there were some really bad experience moments here. You know, a lot of people talk about how Catan is still a fun game to them. And I think Catan can be a fun game, but Catan has these moments where you get around to your turn and you roll dice and you don't generate any numbers for you. You generate resources for other people, and you've just taken another turn where you got absolutely nothing to do in that turn. And those turns take about 30 seconds apiece, and then it's back around to you in 2 minutes. This game, one of my 5 rounds, I literally couldn't do anything that was getting me to the end, goal. And so that was out of 5 rounds and about 30 minutes between rounds that happened to me in this. And I really don't like to play Catan because of that occasional, 30-second turn that you don't get to do anything. And that happened to me in this, 2.5 hour game where I lost basically a fifth of my game for it because of what the mechanism set me up for. Did I make some mistakes? Yeah, probably. I probably could have fixed it. But that's a bad experience. And people, listen, I mean, there were several times during this game where I heard people just frustrated. At least 3 of the 4 of us, I'm not sure, maybe all 4 of us had moments in the game where we were just like, what the heck? I can't do anything here. That's not a good gameplay experience to me. So I'll never request to play this game again. If you guys really wanted to play it, sure, I'll play it with you. Maybe it would be a more fun experience, but I doubt it. And here's the deal, right? You mentioned there's rough edges on this game. There's no reason to play games with rough edges a second time. There's so many good games that exist that are streamlined, that are fun to play, and create an enjoyable experience for everybody at the table. So I don't know why we would ever go back and play a game that, when there's such a huge variety out there to try, that makes people have a bad experience of the game. So this is definitely a no for me. What about you, Chris? How did you feel after your first play, and would you request to play it again?
I'm really torn on this one, and in part because I was so fascinated by it, and I was so intrigued by the rule set and the theme and the production that I went into this game just dying to love it. A lot like Australia, which we talked about a couple months ago. And my actual experience of the game, I think, was a real mix between what Adam said and what you guys said. There were so many moments when I was like, the theme of this is so cool. I love the aspect of moving around the board with the wind because it's just unique. It's interesting, and it really it ties in kind of with the theme of the game and the things that you're doing, but at the same time, it can be incredibly frustrating. On the other hand, there were a ton of times when I felt like there's just nothing I can do here. I have set myself up as best I can for success, and then the wind changes, and there's absolutely nothing I can do to actually give myself the success that I feel like I set myself up for. And that can be a real problem. I mean, in a situation like this where there's a huge, and I mean huge aspect of the game where there's an element of chance that can completely stymie your plans, and in this case, the wind, that can be a real issue. Plus, there's just a lot of little fiddly rules in this game that can be a real problem as well. And, Tim mentioned the thing about the Zephyrs were like the sort of the teleportation ports that he had mentioned before that he thought people couldn't move through, but you could. That's a situation where it was probably quite frustrating for him to be able to, get in that situation where he thought he was safe and then not be. At the end of the game, I was kind of kicking myself because Tim ended up winning by 1 point, and it occurred to me as he was taking his turn, all I had to do to get that extra point and tie the game at the end was to take basically a free move and to move myself back out into space where I would have gotten one more notoriety point when that turn wrapped up, and then it would have been, into basically a playoffs round. But, something like that where you can just make a little simple mistake like either of us did and have it completely determine the outcome of the game. I mean, that's really frustrating. Now, having said all that, I would ask for this again, maybe not with this group because we've got, 2 out of 4 of us who, really had no interest in playing it again. I would be interested in actually maybe tackling a round or two if I could do it without buying the game, of doing the solo mode and seeing how it is and seeing if there's kind of a redemptive way of looking at those rules issues that I was bringing up. But it's a tough one. I mean, there's definitely some real downsides to this. There's some real upsides, and I wish they could have resolved. And I don't know the answer. I mean, I'm not clever enough of a game designer. I'm not a game designer at all. But I don't know how you fix those problems. But there's a couple problems in there that I feel like if you could fix them, this would be a 10 times better game, and I wish that it was.
Can I just say one thing? I was thinking through the game, and I don't normally like to do this because I don't want to, judge how someone else went through a design. But I almost feel like the one thing that they could have done that would have fixed the biggest frustration in this game is that if you had to go directly against the wind, you have to spend 2 movement points to go that direction instead of just not being able to do it at all. Then at least you would have had some forward progress headed into whatever your goal was, even if you couldn't get there all the way that time, instead of just saying like, I can't move anywhere that's useful for me at all other than right or left, and maybe it sets me up for next time. So just because, Chris, you mentioned I don't know how to fix this, I don't know that would fix it either, but that was just my thought during the game, that maybe something like that would have allowed you to at least maybe, do something, even if it was more restrictive, would have been a way to make it a little bit better for me personally.
To give you a sense of progression, like working towards a goal.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Or in the rare cases where you really only needed, one movement in one direction, but you couldn't get there. So you just have to spend 2 of your action points, and now all of a sudden you've got an opportunity to do something. So
I'll mention, since you brought up the solo mode, this game also has a collaborative mode. If your group is into collaborative play, this game might have some additional interest to you.
Yeah, and that's actually, co-op, a game where you're kind of fighting against the mechanisms of the game and the luck of it. Cooperative sometimes makes that feel better too. I agree. Co-op's not a big thing for me, but at least then you feel like, hey, we're all in this together. We're all working together, and I didn't get to do something, but I'll do something that might set up Adam for the next turn. So that's an interesting thought on that. And maybe some people would really get a kick out of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, so we're going to talk about some games that we're excited about, as well as maybe the right recipe to drink with this game right after this. All right, welcome back. So, Chris, what do you got for us this week? You got a cocktail that goes along with being a sea captain?
Yes, this was truly a labor of love coming up with a drink for this game. And the one I picked was Grog. It's a drink whose history goes back to the 18th century when the British Admiral Edward Vernon decreed that his crew's daily rum ration would be cut with water. Apparently drunk sailors don't make the most seaworthy crew, but needless to say, the sailors got a little salty about this decision, but the Admiral did throw them a bone. The sailors had the opportunity to add sugar and lime to their ration to make it just a little bit more palatable, and voila, a seagoing legend ended up being born. And I'll just add in here another little tidbit of fun naval history. The mixing of the water in the rum took place in a large wooden barrel called a scuttlebutt, a term that now means rumors, or in other words, kind of the original water cooler talk. So back to the drink. There's an old saying that goes back to the very early days of the grog, and that is 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak. And anybody who's familiar with tropical drinks will be very familiar with that. And this very general recipe that I'm going to give is lets you make the grog pretty much any way you like it. And this is just one example. And also for the purposes of this recipe, for each part, so the 1 of this, 2 of that, I'm talking about half ounces. So the 1 of sour, I'm going to use 1/2 ounce of lime juice, but it could be lemon or it could be any other sour juice that you like. 2 of sweet. Sugar is the standard here, but you could also try honey. You could try different varieties of sugar, or you could even try some kind of interesting flavored syrup. And for that, you'd use about 1 ounce. 3 of strong. This is the rum, of course. But of course, there's all different kinds of rum, and each one has its own unique flavor. So you could have a funky Jamaican rum that's going to be a whole different experience than a milder Puerto Rican rum or a real ass-kicking, 151 proof rum. In the game tonight, I used the naval rum, which is the traditional style, but any style is going to bring its own unique flavor profile, and for that, you're going to drop in about 1.5 ounces. Lastly, you've got your 4 of weak, and this is of course the water that got the crew so bummed out, but it's also the part that helps you keep from steering your ship onto the rocks. For that, you're going to put in 2 ounces. No fancy preparation here. If you're using solid sugar instead of syrup, dissolve the solids in a little bit of warm water, add the other ingredients, stir, add ice, stir it again until chilled, and that's it. Drop the mainsail, enjoy your grog, and don't let the first mate catch you sleeping on your watch. Cheers.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, whenever I've heard the term grog, I always assumed it was like a crappy drink that sailors, like they drank whatever they could. Man, this was one of the most delicious rum drinks I've ever had. It was so tasty. It had just that little hint of citrus. I asked Chris before what sugar I should use, and I was just going to use a white sugar, and he said he recommended brown sugar. So I put some brown sugar in there. Oh my God, it was so good. This was a really delicious drink. So definitely recommend trying it out, especially if you're playing Windward or any pirate or sailing themed game. It's a great fit for it. All right, so let's talk about some other games we've been playing other than Windward. Steve, anything that's been on your mind this week?
Well, I went camping last week, so spent a large portion of the week huddled under rain canopies because it rained the entire time we were there, in addition to a couple of other games that we played, plus some outdoors type games. We played a game called The Bears and the Bees. I would say that this is a kid's game, I guess you'd call it. Pretty simple mechanics. It's basically a 2-dimensional Uno. But I played it a couple times over the course of the week, and every time people pretty much enjoyed it. Super easy to learn. Most of the people I was playing with were not hobbyist gamers. They did not have any complaint with the low difficulty level of the game at all. Basically 4 different types of cards. Cards are shaped like a hexagon. You have to match 2 sides or more of the card you're playing with 2 sides or more of the existing cards in the stack of cards that you've built up over the course of the game. Some of the cards make your opponents draw a card. Some of the cards let you give a card to your opponent. Basically, you're just trying to get rid of your cards. There's a couple fun little mechanics in there, and everybody had a good time.
What was the name of the game?
The Bears and the Bees.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I've never heard of that before.
Sounds like fun.
It's bees trying to collect honey, basically, but there's some bears that will come in and trash the place and steal your...
Okay, interesting.
It sounds like a fun game to play around the campfire.
Yep, just simple and pretty straightforward.
And if you're trying to get rid of your cards, you just flick them into the fire when nobody's looking. Chris, what's on your mind this week in games?
I'm actually pretty excited this week. A few weeks ago, maybe a month and a half, I've kind of lost track of time recently, but Eric Lang put out a call on Twitter to Indigenous designers, and this really fascinated me because this is a topic that I've been very interested in, and I've been really hoping to see more Indigenous voices in game design. And one of the game designers that actually spoke up when Eric put this call out was Tomasi Menyuk, who is an Inuit designer who created a game called Nunami in 2020. It's self-published, and he did the art, he did the design, and it's just an incredibly interesting looking game. It is, I won't call it area control, he actually refers to it as terrain management. And the idea there is that you may play as the people or the environment, but as you are working through this very stylized version of terrain, the idea there is to bring balance between the people and the environment in a way that I think is really kind of unique. And it's a beautiful game. It's a very interesting game, and it's one that it's a little bit difficult to find, but I managed to find it on Amazon. I think it was off of Amazon for a little bit, but got available for sale again. And so I picked up a copy, and it just shipped. So I'm really looking forward to getting that and giving it a try. Sadly, in the course of looking at this game and looking for other indigenous designers, it's actually quite difficult to find other games that are being produced. And this has bummed me out for a while now, that the one absolutely shining example of the kind of thing I'd love to see is that there is a game that was being put out called Coyote and Crow that just like fascinated me beyond what I can say. But it's an RPG, and I'm not an RPG player. I'm a board game player, and it's just not my thing. But I would love to see something like that, more of that, coming into the board game realm. And so I'm dying to get my copy of this game and play it, and see more of this coming down the road in the future.
Nice, Chris. Those sound awesome. I'm going to jump in here. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their findings yesterday. This is a UN, United Nations group that every year does studies on climate change and how humans are impacting climate. The findings were pretty bleak. We have to start making change quickly, or there's going to be drastic change that are going to impact tens or even hundreds of millions of people, their livelihoods, their wealth, their lives. It's very serious. So I want to talk about two games this week that actually address this issue in pretty unique and I think very useful ways. Number one is a game that's on Kickstarter right now. It's called Earthborne Rangers. Earthborne Rangers is set to end in 7 days. So I think if you listen to this podcast the day it releases, you may still be able to back it. If not, they usually do late pledges. But what's really interesting about this is it does sound like an interesting game. It's a cooperative card game with a deck building element. So not the type of deck building we usually do, but the type of deck building where you can kind of build your decks before the game, create decks for the different players and then try to use them together to do something in the game. But what's really interesting about this game to me is that the company Earthborne Games that's creating it has a goal to be 100% sustainable when they create this. And so they're doing a number of things to do that, use recyclable materials. But one of the most interesting things that is not commonly done is they're planning to manufacture this game, if they meet the pledge goals they wanted to, but to manufacture this game in the regions that it's actually going to be sold in. So typically what happens with game production is that it all gets produced in China or Indonesia or some Asian country typically, and then it's all shipped all over the world. And one of the biggest environmental impacts of the board gaming hobby is the shipping. Anything that's shipping, it's using natural resources, it's causing pollution, and it's a huge impact on rising carbon emissions and climate. And so their goal is to try to produce locally and distribute as tight as possible with recyclable materials, and some initiatives to try to restore habitat that was taken away from the materials that were produced here. So that's a pretty exciting goal. I think it's worth checking out. So take a look at that if you haven't heard about it already. The second game I'm going to talk about is not on Kickstarter yet, but is expected to be later this month. So check it out when it comes around. That game is called Earth Rising: 20 Years to Transform Our World. And this is a cooperative game that deals with our current situation, that we essentially have about 20 years. At our current rate, the temperature level is likely to rise between 1.5 and 2 degrees in the next 20 years. And if that happens, it's going to be catastrophic, as I mentioned. So they have a cooperative game that's all about 6 different groups that each player in the game takes on a different role of a different group, and what that group can try to do to have an impact on the environment, the specific unique goals that you can do. So what's pretty neat about it is a cooperative game. It's challenging, but it does also educate you on what are the things that you can be doing, what are the things you can be lobbying for, you can ask people to be lobbying for, and the things to think about on how you can personally have an impact on the environment. And I think that's important. So check that one out when it comes out. I listened to an interview on Organized Fun, the podcast that I was just on a couple of weeks ago. They did an interview with the creators of this game. And in fact, the creators reached out to me recently to see if I could get in with the gameplay. So I may do that. If I get a chance to play it, I'll report back. One of the things they said is that even if you fail, the thing is that you'll see that you had an impact. So yeah, you might fail, there might still be climate change in the game, but you're going to see that the temperature didn't rise quite as much as it would have if you don't do anything. And so that's kind of a cool, thing that you still have a driver, you still have something that makes you feel like you accomplished something and had an impact while playing this cooperative game where you're competing against the forces and kind of the direction things are going right now. So those are a couple of things I wanted to call out. They really stood out to me today, especially after reading this report, but they'd already been on my mind. So check those out. Hopefully, you find some fun in them. Adam, anything going on for you this week?
Tim, I first want to say great points. I want to echo the importance of the environment and kind of the travesty and tragedy of the whole thing is that it's all human caused. And it should be easy, you would think, to get some legislation or some mandates to mitigate this whole situation and to kind of save the planet for future generations, right? Seems like a easy thing to settle on to do. And it's just frustrating. And again, a tragedy and travesty that's been ignored for so long. So hopefully this gets it to the forefront. People start talking about it and taking action. So it's something I'm very passionate about and something needs to be done. Back to board games. The first one I'm going to talk about is... It's a fun one. It's one me and my daughter, we got out Quirkle. This one here is designed by Susan McKinley Ross. If you don't know Quirkle, it's like Scrabble, but there's colors and shapes. And all you're trying to do is line up the colors and shapes and score some points. Pretty simple. My daughter ended up beating me. We played to like 100, so she got 106. I was down in the 80s or something. To celebrate her victory, she made the pieces into a dance floor for her dinosaurs, and we had a little dance party on the dance floor there.
Like you do.
Next game I want to talk about is Shards of Infinity. Let me see who this one's by. This one's designed by Gary Arant and Justin Gary. Hey, that's palindromic. Anyway, this game is a deck builder. It's a straight-up combative deck builder. So Chris and I and Tim and I a little bit, to some extent, have been playing Star Realms, just tons and tons and tons. So I was actually at the board game store and I said, hey, why don't I pick up a deck builder that I can actually shuffle and feel what cards feel like? So instead of just going with Star Realms, I picked up Shards of Infinity, which I've heard good things about. And it's fun. You throw in combos right at the very beginning. You can buy that mercenary mechanic. I won't go into it too much, but some things slightly different than Star Realms or Hero Realms if you're into those. It's just nicely done. Cool art. Very fun to play. So those are the two games I have to talk about.
I've had a chance to play Shards of Infinity. There's actually an app for that as well. So if you're interested in checking that out, I assume you can play it competitively. I've only played it against the AI on a flight. It was a fun little deck builder. It feels very much like Star Realms. There's a lot of similarities going on with it. What was the big hook with this one, Adam? I remember there was something that was unique about it. Something about like you could, trade in a card to get some bigger effect, like scrap a card or something.
Oh, there's this. So you can get the Infinity Shard. So if you get your guy to 20 Infinity Shards on this counter, then you play this card that activates the Infinity Shard, and it's infinite damage. So you can build up your leader. It's like a timer on the game. You can build up your leader to this certain amount of power. Once he gets to this power and that card comes back around, boom, you just win the game with infinity killage and you kill everything.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah, so it kind of gives you a different option than just the traditional deck building. You kind of have a couple different goals to go for.
Right. So. The hook with the Shards of Infinity is the Infinity Shard.
Right, okay.
Infinity power, that's kind of how I feel.
Like infinity lack of power is how I feel all the
time. And by the way, Adam, I've heard good things about Quirkle too. People talk about, I kind of understand the mechanisms of the game. It sounds like a kind of a fun like you got to match patterns or colors without having the same ones next to each other or something like that. Is that right?
Right. No duplicates allowed. No duplicates allowed. Yeah. And the pieces are wood and they're chunky and they're black and they're just so tactile and fun.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. So that's cool. All right, cool. Well, I think that will wrap us up this week. As always, reach out to us on social media if you'd like to chat or just follow us. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes, or you can find us on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. We are due to probably record our 1-year anniversary episode next week. So if you do hear that, if you do hear this and you don't have any questions or comments or feedback for us, if we listen to it in time before the show, we may read it or we may talk about it on the show. So feel free to do that. But if not, watch for that episode. We have some things that we hope are kind of fun planned. So you get to listen to that next week. Till next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all. Bye-bye.
Later, everyone.